Hello and welcome to Not Today Karen. Today's story is about the charismatic turkey Greg, who defeated the entitled Karen from HOA. I've always thought of myself as a live and let live kind of guy. I'm not one to pick fights or start drama, but when the HOA declared war on my pet turkey, Gregory, they crossed a line. Let me tell you, if you think a turkey is just a big chicken, you've never met Gregory. He's 25 pounds of attitude, feathers, and loyalty, and he doesn't take kindly to anyone messing with his family. Gregory wasn't just any turkey. He'd come to me as a scrawny little hatchling, a rescue from a roadside farm that was going under. I had every intention of raising him for Thanksgiving, until he started following me around like a puppy. You try looking into the soulful eyes of a bird that considers you its best friend and telling it it's dinner. Instead, Gregory became a permanent member of the family, free to roam the yard, help with yard work, read, peck at tools, and scare off the occasional squirrel that dared trespass. That was life before the HOA got involved. Peaceful, simple, just me, Gregory, my dog Max, and the occasional neighborly wave. Then Karen moved in, yes, her real name. Karen's reputation preceded her like a bad smell. The day she moved into the neighborhood, she introduced herself by leaving laminated flyers on everyone's porch about her plans to beautify the community. For the record, our community didn't need beautifying. We lived in a rural area where lawns gave way to fields, and everyone was fine with a few dandelions or a rusty old tractor parked in the yard. But not Karen. Her first order of business was organizing a morning patrol of the neighborhood. She'd walk the streets with a clipboard, taking notes on lawns that weren't mowed, fences that needed painting, or in my case, turkeys that didn't fit her idea of suburban perfection. I first noticed her fixation on Gregory one morning when I saw her standing on the edge of my property, arms crossed. Gregory, ever the curious bird, waddled up to investigate. He fluffed his feathers and let out a gobble, and Karen jumped back like he'd pulled a knife. "Is that thing safe?" she called out. I leaned on my shovel and smirked. "Safer than most people I know." She didn't appreciate the joke. From that day on, she started her campaign against Gregory. At first, it was subtle comments about farm animals not belonging in residential areas, vague mentions of bylaws, and the occasional pointed glare. Then came the letters. It started with a knock on the door. I was out back repairing the chicken coop, and Gregory was doing his usual patrol around the property, puffing himself up like a feathery security guard. Karen was standing on my porch with a clipboard and that tight-lipped smile that means trouble. "Jake," she said, her voice sugary sweet, "we need to talk about your bird." "Turkey," I corrected. "His name's Gregory." Her smile didn't budge. "Right. Well, Gregory is creating a disturbance. He's been wandering into other yards and intimidating people." I glanced over at Gregory, who was currently inspecting a patch of dandelions like they owed him money. "Gregory doesn't leave my property unless someone's dumb enough to invite him over," I said. Karen's smile faltered. "The HOA board has received multiple complaints. We're going to have to ask you to remove him." I crossed my arms. "Remove him? What is he, an unlicensed shed?" "Gregory's family. And last I checked, there's nothing in the HOA rules about turkeys." Karen's face twitched. "We'll see about that." The next day, I found a letter in my mailbox. Sure enough, the HOA had drafted an amendment to the neighborhood bylaws overnight. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, banning all non-traditional pets exceeding 20 pounds. How convenient. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've got a cousin who is, and he owes me more favors than I can count. I sent him the letter, and he confirmed what I suspected. They couldn't enforce the rule retroactively. Gregory was grandfathered in, and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. That didn't stop Karen from trying. Over the next few weeks, she stepped up her harassment campaign. HOA members started showing up with clipboards, trying to inspect my property for violations. Gregory, bless his heart, took this as a personal challenge. Every time someone set foot near my yard, he'd puff up his feathers, let out a war cry, and charge. Watching a grown man drop his clipboard and sprint back to his car because a turkey was after him? Priceless. Not everyone in the neighborhood was on Karen's side. My next-door neighbors, the O'Malleys, thought Gregory was hilarious. They'd sit on their porch and cheer him on whenever he chased off another HOA member. "Jake," Mr. O'Malley said one evening, "you've got the best security system in town. I'd pay good money to see Gregory chase Karen down the street." "You might get your wish," I replied. "I'm thinking about teaching him to recognize clipboards." Mrs. O'Malley nearly choked on her iced tea laughing. "Please do." And so, with a bag of sunflower seeds and a little patience, Gregory's training began. By the end of the week, he'd learned to associate clipboards with intruders. The next time Karen came by, clipboard in hand, Gregory spotted her from across the yard and let out a battle cry. She barely made it back to her golf cart before he was on her tail, feathers flying. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. If anything, Gregory's antics only seemed to fan the flames of her vendetta. Within days of her failed retreat, the HOA announced an emergency board meeting. Flyers were plastered on mailboxes across the neighborhood, all bearing the ominous message: Community Standards Enforcement Update. "Looks like Karen's doubling down," Mr. O'Malley said, handing me one of the flyers. "Good," I replied. "It'll make her next defeat that much sweeter." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at the local community center. I decided to attend, bringing Gregory along for moral support. He rode in the back of my truck, perched like a feathery king surveying his domain. When we arrived, the parking lot was already full. HOA members, neighbors, and even a local news crew had gathered, all buzzing with anticipation. As Gregory and I walked in, the room fell silent. Karen's face twisted into a look of pure horror. "You can't bring that animal in here," she snapped. I patted Gregory's head. "He's here to observe." "Open meeting, right?" Karen sputtered but couldn't come up with a response. We took our seats in the back, Gregory settling in beside me like the perfect gentleman he was. The meeting began with Karen taking the floor, clipboard in hand and her voice dripping with self-importance. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Maintaining Community Standards: A Path Forward." The first slide showed a stock photo of a pristine suburban neighborhood. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, not a feather in sight. "As you can see," Karen began, clicking to the next slide, "our community has been struggling with a number of challenges. Unmowed lawns, unsightly garden ornaments, and unauthorized pets." She glared in my direction as the slide changed to a grainy photo of Gregory pecking at a garden gnome. The crowd murmured, a mix of confusion and suppressed laughter. Gregory, oblivious to his newfound fame, let out a contented gobble, which only made the room laugh harder. Karen's face turned red. "This is no laughing matter," she snapped. "Allowing animals like that to roam free sets a dangerous precedent. What's next? Goats? Pigs? At least goats mow the lawn for free," someone muttered, earning a round of chuckles. Karen banged her gavel. "Order. This is a serious issue." I raised my hand. "Point of order, Madam President," I said, mimicking her tone. "Didn't we agree last month that bylaws couldn't be applied retroactively? Gregory was here before your rule change." Karen glared. "That doesn't excuse his disruptive behavior." "Disruptive?" I countered. "Gregory's only disruptive to people who think they can march onto private property uninvited. If anything, he's doing your job for you, enforcing boundaries." The room erupted into applause. Even the news crew looked impressed. Karen, flustered, fumbled with her slides, clicking through a series of unrelated charts before giving up entirely. After the disastrous meeting, Karen went quiet for about 2 days. Then, like a storm brewing on the horizon, trouble began stirring again. One morning, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Inside was a summons to appear before a special HOA disciplinary hearing. "What now?" I muttered, flipping through the paperwork. According to the notice, I was being accused of violating community standards and creating a public nuisance. Gregory, of course, was listed as Exhibit A. Mr. O'Malley laughed so hard when he saw the paperwork that he nearly fell off his porch. "A public nuisance? Gregory? What's next? Accusing him of tax evasion?" I wasn't worried yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had something up her sleeve. Gregory, as always, seemed unbothered, pecking happily at a patch of clover as I plotted my next move. On the day of the disciplinary hearing, I walked into the community center with Gregory trotting dutifully by my side. Karen was already there, flanked by 2 other HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A hastily erected table at the front of the room served as their courtroom, complete with nameplates and a tape recorder. Karen cleared her throat. This hearing will now come to order. We're here to address the ongoing violations committed by Mr. Jake Wallace and his pet. Gregory let out a low gobble, as if offended by the lack of respect. Karen's eyes narrowed. First, let the record show that Gregory has repeatedly been observed leaving Mr. Wallace's property and causing distress to other residents. Objection, I said, raising a hand. Gregory has never left my property uninvited. If anyone's letting him wander, it's the same people filing complaints. Karen's face flushed. And what about the incident involving Mrs. Rosen's garden? You mean the garden she planted 3 feet onto my property? I countered. Gregory was defending what's rightfully his. The 2 other board members exchanged glances, trying to suppress grins. Karen pressed on, but every argument she made was met with a calm, factual rebuttal from me, or a timely gobble from Gregory that sent the room into barely stifled laughter. Finally, one of the board members spoke up. Karen, do we have any actual evidence of wrongdoing here? Because so far, it sounds like this turkey's doing a better job at security than the HOA. The disciplinary hearing continued with Karen growing more flustered by the minute. She pulled out a stack of photographs, blurry shots of Gregory in what she described as aggressive poses. In one, he was mid-strut with his feathers puffed out, and in another, he appeared to be glaring at a garden gnome. This, Karen declared, slamming her hand on the table, is a clear and present danger to the community. One of the board members stifled a laugh. He looks like he's just being a turkey. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. I leaned back in my chair. Karen, if you're this afraid of a turkey, maybe the problem isn't Gregory. Maybe it's your clipboard. The room erupted into laughter, and even the other board members couldn't hide their amusement. Karen looked like she was about to explode. This is a serious matter, she shrieked, slamming her gavel so hard the handle snapped off. At that moment, Gregory let out the loudest gobble of his life, as if to say, case close. Karen tried to regain her composure, but it was clear the room wasn't on her side. The remaining HOA board members exchanged glances before one of them, a kindly older man named Frank, raised his hand to speak. Karen, he began, I think it's time we adjourn this hearing. We've heard enough. Karen looked scandalized. But we haven't even issued a ruling. Frank sighed. If you want my ruling, here it is. Jake and Gregory aren't causing any harm. In fact, I'd argue they're contributing to the community's safety and morale. The room burst into applause. Karen sputtered, turning to the other board member for support, but she simply shrugged. I'm inclined to agree with Frank, she said. This feels like a waste of everyone's time. Karen's face turned crimson. Fine, she spat, grabbing her broken gavel. But this isn't over. As she stormed out of the room, Gregory let out another triumphant gobble, earning him a standing ovation. Word of Gregory's victory spread quickly. The local news ran a segment on the turkey who took on the HOA, complete with footage of Karen fleeing from one of his infamous charges. Gregory became a minor celebrity, and I started receiving requests for Meet Gregory events. Karen, meanwhile, resigned from her position as HOA president within the month, citing personal reasons. The HOA itself seemed to mellow out after her departure, and the new leadership focused more on actual community improvements rather than micromanaging residents' lives. As for Gregory, he settled back into his routine of patrolling the yard, defending his territory, and occasionally reminding the neighbors who was really in charge. To this day, I still catch the O'Malleys watching from their porch, waiting for the next great Gregory moment. The moral of the story? Don't mess with a man's turkey, especially not one who knows how to handle a clipboard.